And we're live, and you're here with Duncan. This is the Property Funder podcast. Now, before we start talking to Duncan, a couple of bits of admin. First of all, I'd like to give thanks to Avonmore Capital, who are the sponsor of this podcast, and without whom we wouldn't be able to speak to Duncan, who we've got here today. Avonmore Capital is a development finance and bridging lender based in London, but lending all over England and Wales, lending against projects between 250,000 and 15 million pounds. And if you'd like to get in touch with Avonmore Capital, please contact www.avonmorecapital.com and they'll be very happy to help you. Now, again, final bit of admin before we speak to Duncan. So Duncan, please bear with us just for one moment more. If you're a new visitor to the podcast and you're possibly listening or watching because Duncan's come on, welcome. If you're a returning visitor to the podcast in any of its forms, please like, subscribe, and give us a 5-star rating or review so that we can speak to more people like Duncan and we can have a bigger audience that can benefit from people like Duncan's experiences, wisdoms, and inspirations. Now, Duncan, thanks for putting up with that. What's your full name and where do you come from? What's your business? Tell us for those people who've been under a rock who don't know who you are. What are you all about?
So let's talk about what I'm up to currently. I think it's a good place to start because I'm sure you'll want to delve a little further back. But I'm Duncan Kreeger. My main job is that I am the CEO of TAB, which is a lending business and property finance investment platform that I founded in 2018, having spent a lot of my working career around mortgages and real estate in the UK. I'm born and bred in London. I'm very proud of it, love London and what it's all about. And as far as TAB's concerned, we kind of do a few different things. So first and foremost, we lend money secured on property. We offer 10-year mortgages and also short-term bridging loans and quite a wide variety in between, with including refurbishment loans and development finance. So there is quite a lot of crossover. Mike, and obviously you introduced your business before. It's kind of similar themes. So we cover a lot of those types of loans. We also allow investors to invest directly into those types of loans. And really excitingly, something I'd like to talk more about today is fractional investment in real estate. So we have lent just under £500 million since we started in 2018. And we're busy trying to improve our funding so that we can be appealing to a wider variety of the market. And also super excited about opening up real estate investments to a much broader range of people than has previously been possible, certainly from what I've seen. Just a very quick whistle-stop tour.
Yeah, and having seen some of your announcements probably in the last couple of days as well around going into longer-term mortgages, it was certainly one of the things I was going to ask you about and talk about the motivations of it, and maybe also some of the pitfalls as someone in the industry and co-owning a business that does something similar. But I mean, I was very excited to have you come on. I think that we've met quite a few times previously. You even interviewed me at a past FP show, probably one of my first podcast appearances, and which I enjoyed thoroughly. Yeah, I've always liked your energy and the cut of your jib, and I think that repeat listeners of the podcast or repeat viewers of the podcast will probably share that enthusiasm and excitement for your coming on. So I'm absolutely delighted that you're here and you're talking to us, because I think we're going to have a really, really good chat. I think one of the things that I'm particularly interested to talk about before we go and talk about what you're doing with TAB is actually to talk about your entrepreneurial journey and how you got here, particularly because of what you achieved at a very young age. And a lot of our audience are aspiring entrepreneurs and they want to make it in business. And I think that, and a lot of them will be quite young. And I think they'll take a lot of inspiration from someone like yourself. So if you're able to just share with our audience what your story looked like, you know, from being kind of a, you know, a teenager, spotty teenager to before you set up Tab, and why you set up Tab. Love to hear that story and how it came about.
Yeah, I mean, do you know, I've been asked this question a lot recently, and I've also been sort of looking back very recently over the amount of companies that I have been involved with, including a lot of things that didn't go according to plan. And then also you start to hone your understanding of what you're looking for, where you can add value. I think just to talk about entrepreneurship for a minute, you know, and even going back to my kind of school days, I've never been good at being told what to do. I've been much more the type of person to learn from my own mistakes, and then it be down to me to make sure I don't make those mistakes again. And I think that is, if I had to kind of summarize it in a kind of short format, it would be that some people just aren't cut out for working for someone else. And it's not because I think I can do it better or because I've got great ideas that nobody else has, but I find it easier to energize myself to do something that I really want to, or that I choose to do, rather than someone telling me to do it, even if it's for the better or the worse. So yeah, I guess I've always been entrepreneurial. I'll kind of tell you a few quick stories that spring to mind. But even in my school days, I remember teachers kind of saying to me and to my parents, look, it's probably better we just kind of let him go and do his own thing, because I was very, very headstrong about wanting to get out of school as soon as possible. One thing I should say is I'm not scared of working hard. You know, I absolutely love going to work every day. I work extremely hard. I don't really had much time off in the last 20 years. I don't switch my phone off, never have done. I'd rather keep up a little bit every day than sort of take a 2-week holiday and then come back and catch up then. But even from a very young age, I've always looked at the world in a way where it's like, well, how did they do that? And how could I have done it better? And I think possibly one of my very first entrepreneurial kind of ideas was that I was on holiday with my friends, kind of like the first time I'd been away without my parents. Went away with all my friends, went on a beach holiday, and there was an alloy wheel shop in Tenerife or somewhere right next to the beach. And between me and one of my friends, Adam, we somehow managed to buy 5 sets of alloy wheels and ship them back to the UK. It took about 5 months for them to arrive, and we stored them in my parents' garage. And I think we sold 1 set, but the other 4 sets got dumped several years later. And even just talking about it now, I learned several lessons from that experience. You know, do your research, calculate all your costs. It wasn't obvious to me at that time. I wanted to drive cars. I knew I liked them, but it wasn't obvious to me at that time that different wheels had different sizes, different bolts, which they would fit different cars and they wouldn't. And, you know, all of those things sort of started to hit me when I'd spent my life savings on these. And I think there is a bit of a theme there. I guess, you know, the point is that I've always been searching to do something for myself and be the master of my own destiny. And I'm very much at least there, if not even more there now.
Well, but you know what I love about the story is that, I mean, I don't know exactly how old you were then, but you were fearless.
Yeah, for sure.
And I guess is that you were fearless and you were willing, you wanted to try something. And I guess you know, and I guess we'll again, we're going to talk about the areas that you're expanding into, but you seem to have that a fearlessness and a willingness to try things.
I just don't understand. I mean, I've never been able to take somebody saying, no, you can't do that. You know, it's never really registered in my brain.
Yeah.
That somebody says, no, you can't, it means no, you can't, and I shouldn't try. I would only try to do something that I think is of value, and that I would be proud to stand behind. There's nothing I've ever done in my career where I look back and think, oh, that's cringeworthy, and I hope nobody ever uncovers it. I think I got a very good grounding. You know, my morals, I believe, are always in the right place. I always try to do the best, and that involves kind of facing up to things when things don't go according to plan. But I'm sort of typically the type of guy that if somebody tells me no, you can't, then I'll just find someone else who says yes, I can. And that's certainly been a theme throughout my career. the bigger your ideas and the bigger the vision is, the more people will queue up to tell you that it's not a good idea, or they don't think you should do it, or they don't think you can. And I have always been a super positive person, and kind of in the nicest possible way. It just has never fazed me what other people think. I've been happy to sort of forge my own path.
Well, I mean, I think there's some great lessons there for any aspiring entrepreneur, and even those of us who are more long in the tooth entrepreneurs as well. It's just, it sounds to me like your advice to anyone would be, anyone who wants to get into business or get into entrepreneurship, is just get stuck in, give it a go, and see what happens. And if something doesn't work out, go in a different direction.
Yeah, and also now as well, I often get people approaching me all the time. I had a meeting yesterday about a new business venture, somebody who's followed my journey, starting something new. And I think what always comes up is, if I should do it, I shouldn't. And then when's a good time to do it? And my answer is always now. You don't want to wait. There's not really any reasons that I've heard presented to me why doing this great idea is such a fantastic idea, but you shouldn't do it now. You should do it at some time in the future, because you just have to get on with it. On the flip side, I've heard so many people that said, oh, I had a great idea once, and I could have done that and I should have done that. But you don't hear that from people that have done it and have tried it. You will hear it didn't go according to plan, and it didn't work out. But what you won't hear is, I had a good idea and I never did it. I think that's terrible.
Well, I always think about Gary Vaynerchuk always talks about, loads of people can have great ideas, but the people who are really successful, lots of people will have the same idea. It's who can execute on that best and who can get the timing right. Yeah. I think that's the key. And someone's gonna bore you down the pub about all of these great ideas that they had, but this happened or that happened, or they just didn't do it. Well,
yeah,
you say, well, good for you, but you only get one shot at life.
You didn't take the risk.
Why didn't you go for it?
Yeah, you didn't take the risk and you didn't get the reward. Obviously, again, albeit you didn't have the downside. The risk and reward has always been something I've felt quite comfortable weighing up. And to me, I always look at, what's the worst case scenario. If you're in a job and you want to start a new business, but you can't for this reason and that reason, what is the worst that can happen? Worst that happens is it's a massive failure. You lose some money, it doesn't work out, and you have to go back and get your job again. Which to most people is available. And then to me, there's literally no downside. The kind of worst case scenario is you end up with exactly what you had before you started. I think people have a fear of failure. They don't want to be the guy that failed. I don't have that fear. It doesn't compute in my brain. But if your worst case scenario is you're back to where you started, then to me, there is literally zero risk. And if the risk is much, much greater than that, then you need to consider another way. How do I do the same thing without taking so much risk? Getting investment, bringing a partner on board, developing my plan further, seeking advice, or honing my product, or whatever it may be. But there are ways to limit your downside. And so that's the way my brain works.
Yeah, I had to do some work with a psychologist when I was finishing university, and we drilled down to basically why I'd always end up with kind of I'd always end up with kind of B grades, or sort of B/C grades at the time. And he boiled it down to, there was a fear of failure was the reason I was kind of getting pass marks, but there's also a thing called fear of success. And I was also suffering from a fear of success. And I think that we often talk about fear of failure, but I think there's also people who are actually afraid of being successful as well. Because I think success also means change, and also requires a degree of personal growth that they maybe are unwilling to go through.
Yeah, I think it's just, what you're describing is just a fear of something, or what I would potentially call an excuse. It's, I'm a sort of very direct, and certainly not saying my way is the best way. And I don't think when I have these conversations, it should be, well, this is, my advice, go out and do it right now. It's more a kind of insight into the way that I see things. But I think a fear of something is what holds people back. And what I've seen throughout my career is that typically when you let your guard down, that fear that you had doesn't actually exist. And that's why I call it an excuse. It's a kind of a thing that might happen if I do this, but that's not taking into account the other things that might happen. I think there are loads of excuses and loads of reasons why people shouldn't start. And a lot of them could be very legitimate, but a lot of them are just something, again, that I've never felt. I'm a super positive guy. I basically am extremely lucky that I'm the type of person that looks outside in the morning and I think the sun's shining, where somebody else could look at it and think it's cloudy and dark and grey. Like physically and mentally, I am aware from family members and friends that I've grown up with over the years that have struggled with things that, I really just don't struggle with. I just look at the positive side of life. And I use that to my advantage. So I try to get everybody around me to look at that, to look through that lens. And it's definitely, these things are not just applied to business at all. In fact, I would say completely the opposite. I think it's very difficult to have one mindset at home and one mindset at work. And one thing I've always tried to do is wear my heart on my sleeve, and I would act exactly the same person, wearing the same things and using the same language if I'm sitting with my parents at dinner or my friends or private equity firm in a presentation. I hope and I try to be authentic. I don't see why you need to sort of make these differences between I need to act in this certain way if I'm going to go down that route. It's being authentic. And I think my positive outlook on life definitely helps that.
Yeah, well, I think authenticity is very important, and I'd be lying if I said I was always the same with everyone all the time. I think, I think for my own part, I have a bit of a chameleon type character, which probably helps me in lots of situations, but in other aspects it doesn't. I wanted to just touch back on suitability for entrepreneurship, because I can see you, like me, are what I would deem unemployable. And it obviously in a good way for ourselves, certainly. And I don't want to say you call. I don't know if you would agree with it. I'm just repeat back what you said, which is that you were never good at being told what to do. I would question whether you would stray into agreeing that maybe you were a bit of a non-conformist as well. But I think also being kind of not being so compliant and not being so conformist probably helps one be an entrepreneur. Whereas if you are compliant, you're probably less naturally inclined to be an entrepreneur and probably more suited to being an employee. And certainly, you can get a lot of people make the wrong choice about whether they should be entrepreneurs or not.
I mean, I don't think I'm compliant. I do think I like to think more freely. I guess it's just important to note that there are different ways to do the same thing. So, just because I'm not saying, when I said previously I'm exactly the same person I would be, and I feel like I'm sort of in the scenarios where I'm meeting all these different people and having different conversations, I feel like I'm as kind of similar in every single environment as anyone I've ever seen. I mean, you often see people go into a meeting with like a different body language or whatever it may be. I think it's about kind of honing your skills and using them to your advantage. And I'm definitely not a conformist. I feel like there is a better way to do some things, and I'm, again, not always right, but I'm always searching for, can I add value? Can I do something differently? And I think it's become different in employment in that people are empowered to kind of make change, certainly in big organizations. For me, I don't want to micromanage my team, 43 people in my team, to do things the way I would do. In fact, I very much believe in allowing people to do things in their own way, and just kind of highlighting what you're good at and what you're bad at, and trying to play to your strengths and bring people around you to better you and to better the delivery of your message. But I think they are very, very different paths. And a lot of people that sort of say they're entrepreneurs or want to be entrepreneurs maybe sort of ban the term around differently. And I think if you've got a startup idea and somebody is investing in you to pay your salary for 2 years, I would kind of call that more of an employee than an entrepreneur. I think an entrepreneur is someone who really takes risk, and that they physically have to make something work in order to live or to succeed. So I guess my point is there's kind of different levels, but my thing is about trying to do things differently. And I think it is, I feel disruptive, but I think that can come across as if you're disruptive at school, that's definitely a negative. If you're disruptive in the business world or in a market that you operate in, it's kind of seen as a positive. And I think there's a kind of balance between the two, which is that I want to be disruptive, but I want to be disruptive in the right way. And I don't want to be so headstrong about being disruptive or destructive, that I sort of missed the whole purpose of what I was doing there in the first place. I don't know if that sort of makes sense or answers your question.
Yeah, of course. Just going back to the point around failure, but I think very much in the US, there's almost a celebration of entrepreneurial failure. Do you feel like in the UK and in Europe more generally, we look down on entrepreneurial failure too much?
Yeah, I mean,
does that act as a barrier to entrepreneurship and people, taking business risks?
Yeah, definitely. Look, I see failure as a positive. That is actually a positive word to me. Failing to me means I have learned something that I'm not going to do again, that is going to give me a better chance of being successful. The reason that I have some successful businesses is because I had the battle scars of those failures. And had those failures not occurred, however difficult they were to handle at the time, I almost definitely wouldn't be in the position that I'm in today with all of the things that are current and active in my life. Yes, there is a difference. The kind of American dream is kind of a sort of something I've picked up over the years. But, if somebody does something successful in America, it's like the general attitude is, hey, man, great, good news for you. Go do it. Live the American dream. In this country, it's like, oh, well, he's probably cheating, or he's done something wrong, or he's, there's always a kind of negative spin on it in this country. I think it does hold people back, but I think the people that are going to rise through it will rise through it anyway. I think the UK is absolutely tiny compared to the US. When people compare the UK to the US, I mean, it's hard to fathom the difference in size between population and opportunity in America. But there is a ridiculous opportunity in the UK as well. And if you surround yourself with people, or you consume social media, or you watch the news about how not to do things and who failed, then you sort of tend to gravitate towards that. And if you watch the success stories and you listen to the right podcasts and you read the right news outlets, then I think you get sort of served things that are more positive and give you the impetus to do so.
Yeah, I suppose that also that the more fear there is around entrepreneurship, those of us like yourself and me, yourself and myself, who are willing to go out there and take risks and grab the opportunities with both hands, there's more opportunity for people like us because there's less competition. I think in the States, if we were in the States, for example, the attitude and the competition would be very different because people's mindsets and attitudes aren't the same. And certainly,
to put that in a slightly different way, I feel like I need all of these different personalities around me for Tab to succeed. So I need the postman who's happy to work for Royal Mail for 25 years to pick up our letters and drop them off where they need to be. And I'm certainly not championing that he should be doing something different with it. He or she should be doing something different with their lives. Work for your pension, build up to retirement age, take some time out, travel the world. I mean, in some respects, that's very appealing to me. There are some bits that are appealing. I need people that are going to come to work in different roles, from admin to tech, for their paycheck and for job satisfaction and potential growth. Again, I need those people to be engaged and happy with their choice in life and their path. Because just because I've got some vision, I want to be disruptive, it doesn't mean I can do it all on my own. I've been good, but getting better at highlighting my weaknesses and trying to fill those voids. And one thing that is not going to help is filling those voids with more people like me. So again, this is not like this is the way you should do it, but more be honest with yourself about what you want from your life be honest with yourself about the level of risk, and therefore the level of reward that you expect in your life, and then choose your own path and be happy with it. And if you go some years down the line and you want to pivot, to use your word that I use all the time, or you want to make a change, then change. People will say, what the hell are you doing? You're leaving a job, you're leaving your family, you're changing career path. They'll queue up to tell you what they think. But if you're honest with yourself about what you're looking for, which will undoubtedly be different today to what it was 20 years ago, then go do it. And that's the kind of attitude that I'm trying to surround myself with.
I loved your comments around empowering your team. I've recently read a couple of books on this, which very much fits with my own personal ethos. Trust and Inspire by Stephen Covey, and Turn the Ship Around by L. David Marquet. And L. David Marquet was talking about putting in place a leader model, rather than a leader follower model, which is kind of your traditional managing, not leading. Whereas I think what you're talking about, and what I espouse anyway in terms of values from a leadership standpoint, is leadership, not management. Notwithstanding that, how do you, as a leader of a team, and by the looks of it, a large and growing team now, how do you put in place guardrails so that the team can make mistakes that they can learn from, but aren't making mistakes that are what Zahir and I would term, we call it a 5-year fatal, i.e. a mistake that could ultimately lead to the business failing within 5 years as a result of that action or inaction?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a few different ways to answer this question. I can tell you for sure, I take ultimate responsibility. So I think one of the first things I would say in response to that is that if something goes wrong, it's my fault. If I've made a mistake myself, it's my fault. If the person that I have empowered to make those decisions gets it wrong, it's also my fault. And if the people that they empower to make important decisions turns out to reflect badly on them, and in turn on me, I am prepared to stand up and say I fucked up. There is just no other way, in my opinion. You cannot have I think culture is super, super important. And to me, one of the ways to embody that is to make sure that I take ultimate responsibility for the decisions that I make, even indirect or direct. Another answer is the same as I would say in my personal life and my business life, and I think possibly the best piece of advice that I ever received is surround yourself with good people. Surround yourself with other people that are prepared to have the same attitude as you, which is that if my team doesn't do something that is fatal, stand up and be counted. And when you come back, make sure you come back stronger than you did before. I'm obviously not talking about thieving and stealing and cheating, because those things to me are just a kind of, it's my responsibility to make sure someone doesn't do something that's illegal, or, and hopefully I put the checks and balances in place to make sure that there isn't a single way that can happen. But you've got to be alert to those sorts of things as well. But if someone makes a mistake, I think it would be very hard to argue that it's completely their fault. And more so, I would be the first person to walk to the front and say, look, this is on me. I gave the wrong person the wrong responsibility. And, is it going to be, if a decision is that important that it is business fatal? And I think that's a pretty catastrophic result. Then be damn sure you had the opportunity to have a say in it before it happened. And if you did, then, to my point, then you are responsible. And, as long as you've done something that you could, just because things haven't gone to plan, even to the point where a business has failed, doesn't mean you shouldn't be prepared to walk around the streets and get on a podcast and talk about it. I mean, that's the failure that I'm talking about. If you're not careful, those are reasons not to do those things in the first place. Don't shoot for the stars in case you hit an asteroid. I mean, that's where that sort of failure mentality starts to trickle in my view.
Yeah, I think being open and honest about failures is a really good thing, and actually something that I'm quite keen on myself. And frankly, I think we people, we end up with this sort of survivorship bias when we talk to a lot of entrepreneurs. I mean, I guess some of this podcast series is a direct beneficiary of that, right? So, but so many of basically all of the best lessons that we learn are ultimately the result of our failures, not necessarily of our successes. You know, if you're constantly successful, what are you actually learning? You don't necessarily grow if you're constantly successful. Yes, I mean, that's maybe that's a bit of a generalization.
It's easy to say, but it is actually true. I mean, it's as simple as that, in my view. I mean, I stood up in front of my entire business at the beginning of last week, and I did a whole presentation on 2024 and beyond. Where are we going? How are we going to get there? And I started with, what did we do well last year, and what could we have done better? I mean, you know, failures, for want of a better word. Did we do enough of this? Did we do enough of that? Are things in the right place? Are our products right? Is our communication right? Is our culture right? It's another way to look back and think everything you should be able to do better. I can't think of anything in our business that we have nailed so much so that we couldn't do it better. And I think another way of saying that is, where did we fail? You know, it's a kind of subtle line. It's, how can we improve, rather than where did we fail?
I think also creating the right culture and environment that encourages us within our organizations to talk about failure and where we failed. You know, I think if you create a culture within a business where it's patently obvious where the failings of the business might have been over a month, a quarter, a year, whatever the period of time is, and yet you've got reports that are still trying to talk up the role that they did, or talk up what the department did, or just more generally within the business how well the business did, or the things that the business did well, without actually being honest and acknowledging where failures lie, speaks to a weakness in the general culture of that business. You've got to be able,
and the leadership.
You've got to be able to have that kind of conversation where it's okay, that people have to feel that it's okay to put your hand up and go, like you said, we fucked up, this didn't go well, this is what we need to do better. Because you're never going to develop and grow as a business if you can't have that kind of conversation.
And I think the alternative is dangerous. I want an attitude in the office that says, I'll put my hand up because I don't understand the question that I've been asked. Not, yeah, fine, I'll do it. And then find out in 6 weeks you haven't, because actually you couldn't. You should be able to say, I think that sounds like a great idea, but if you want me to do that, I'm going to have to go and upskill myself because I don't know. Nobody's expected to know everything, especially in a growing business. For entrepreneurs, things change rapidly. Look at the years that we've been through, and I'm not going to sort of spout all the ups and downs and things we've had to navigate, but a lot of them I have never experienced before, and I shouldn't have had prior knowledge of how to deal with them. You have to learn on your feet. So if the attitude is, we've always done it this way and we don't think it's a good idea and we don't want to change, you will get left behind, undoubtedly. So I really do believe that there is only one way. And it has always worked for me, and I do need to improve at it. And if I continue with all of those things, being a better version of myself, building a better business, making better decisions day after day after day, then in 100 days, if I can improve 1% every day, then I'll be 100% better.
Yeah. Well, I mean, listen, the compound effects of even a 0.1% improvement day on day is phenomenal. So fundamentally,
who can't improve 0.1% every day? I mean,
well, yeah, I've tried. Actually, I've tried it. It's remarkably difficult across a lot of different areas. But yeah, certainly if you focus on one particular thing, for example, then you just talked about.
I think people were hard on themselves. I mean, you just talked about reading books, specific books that you've started reading and why. There will be things that you've read in those books that it might take a year or 2 or 10 for them to become relevant or for it to click. But they wouldn't have ever clicked had you not read them. So you might, I think people are hard on themselves, doing something other than lying in bed all day with your duvet under your head gives you an opportunity to improve somewhere. If you're sort of alert to it and you're open to someone tells you you've done a shit job, doesn't mean that the whole world's come down. It means that how can I make sure that I don't have that feeling again? I think those 1% are to be gained everywhere, all over the place, if you look for them.
I do agree with that completely. I do agree with that completely. Look, let's get into your story, because I think, and then we can talk, and because that'll then lead us into Tab and the exciting things that you're doing. You've been in specialist lending for almost 20 years, according to your LinkedIn anyway. So can you just tell us your story as to how, you know, your life pre-Tab, or your career pre-Tab, and then what prompted you to set Tab up and
Yeah, I mean, I left school super early after teachers said let him go. Eventually everyone gave in. My first job was in a state agency, working in Old Street for a firm called Urban Spaces. And in fact, I was just talking to one of my colleagues before and saying how long it can take some relationships to come back around. And my first ever boss, Alex, is now somebody that we work with closely and we sort of lend to and invest in, and just that's the kind of message around just being consistent and being authentic, that these things can take a long time to come back. Became an estate agent. I had a job, wasn't very good at being told what to do, but I was very hungry to learn. And I immediately fell in love with real estate and property. And my entrepreneurial head was saying, okay, so you can buy that for 500,000, you can spend 500,000 on it. It might be worth 1.5 million. I mean, literally the first properties that I was walking into, kind of new builds and refurbs around Old Street. And then this burning question, even at that early age, was, well, okay, well, how would I get the money to do that? And even if I had all the money, would I use it for this, or would I use it for something else? Would I spread it further? Would I borrow money? How does that work? Because I never learned any of that at school. And to this day, it absolutely baffles me that people can come out of education for, 15 years worth of education and still not have a clue how to calculate what an interest rate is on a mortgage, or the difference between different types of debt, personal loans, credit cards, mortgages. Baffles me. I think it's a fundamental problem with setting people up for the reality of life. But I left that job when the owner of the business, who's somebody else that I still know really, really well, Greg's, called me into his office and said, well, I'm going to take away your guaranteed commission and I'm going to put you on a different package. And I said, well, that's not what we agreed. And he said, look, I think you're ready to go it alone. Tried to dress it up as a positive. And I said, look, I'm doing everything I agreed to. If you're not doing everything you agreed to, I'm leaving. And he said, well, that's my position. And we shook hands and I left. Because I didn't think it was fair and I didn't think it was right. And I've tried to pick up these little lessons all the way throughout my career. And if I said something to an employee at the beginning, then I would damn well hope to stand on what I said, and I would hope them to do the same. So I left that, and I did sort of floated around real estate sort of at a very, very, very junior level. And then my father was a mortgage broker. I'd never really had much interest in what he'd been doing up until then. In fact, he was a financial advisor and he'd just set up his own business. And he asked me, he said, look, if you haven't got a job, why don't you come to the office and help me fill in some forms? And I went to work for his business, which was called Morgan Sterling. And the first qualification that I ever got, that I ever had got, and still probably to this day, was that I qualified as a mortgage advisor. And it really, really interested me. I wanted to understand how to access capital, basically. And that gave me a platform to start seeing loads of different people. And I learned some incredible lessons. I remember my dad saying, look, you need to sit with this client, fill in mortgage application form. And I was looking down the list thinking, it says one of these questions is, what's your salary? And I said, I'm not really sure how to ask that question. He said, okay, I'll teach you. So I said, okay. He said, it's like this. You say, what's your salary? And then someone will answer. And I thought, okay, fine, I'll try that. And sure enough, I started asking what I considered to be difficult questions, and people would just answer. And I met people from all walks of life, from first-time buyers who were being introduced by estate agents to landlords who had multiple properties. And I enjoyed it, to be honest. It fit well with me. I love the thrill of doing deals and closing deals. And I started to arrange some bridging loans with what was at the time Lancashire Mortgage Corporation. Met a guy called Mark Goldberg, and Mark was really good to me as a snotty kid who knew nothing about anything in the industry. And I started placing some business with him where it was appropriate. And I kind of had this idea that I wanted to do some lending myself. And I said to my dad, I want to start a lending business. And he said, you can't start a lending business without any money. And I said, well, how did Halifax start? And he said, look, I really don't have time for these sort of crazy questions. They're a bank, and how they started is, just not a way that I'm used to thinking. And he's told these stories before in front of me. And I guess this is the sort of answer to it all. And I said, well, I'm going to start a lending company. And the first thing that we did, I started a company called West One Loans, literally registered the company myself for £12 on Company's House. In fact, the company was registered as West One Loan Limited. And the reason it was that is because I was talking to one of my dad's introducers, and I said, I'm going to start my own lending company, and Halifax lend at 5% fixed for 5 years, and these guys lend at 1.5% a month. So I'm going to do it that way because I think it'll be easier for me to convince people to come on the journey. And he said, why don't you call it West One Loan? You've already got a number plate, which is something my dad had splashed out on and bought a number plate, which was W11OAN. And he had that plate, and I thought it was a great name. And from that moment on, we were West One Loans. And I spoke to Mark and said, I want to do this. And he said, come up for lunch and I'll show you how it all works. And I went up for lunch to meet him. By then, I'd been joined by Stephen Wasserman, who was my best friend at school, who'd gone away to get a politics degree and done a year of traveling. And while I'd been hosting sort of jobs around the estate agency, and I sat down with him in my flat in Watford and said, look, I want to start a lending company. I think this is how it's going to go. And he said, I'll come and do it with you. And I'll give it a shot for 6 months, see if we can make it work before I go into the city and get a job. We went to see Mark together, and Mark said, if you're going to do it, these are the valuers you need. These are the lawyers you need. The loan to value is the most important thing you're ever going to learn. And I still use those lawyers and those valuers, and I still speak to Mark very frequently. And the first loans we did all the way back then, when we didn't have a single penny of capital to our names, was what I would call branded lending. So Mark basically gave me permission to photocopy my logo onto their terms, and I could present ourselves as West One Loans, and the loans would then effectively apply for a Together loan or a Lancashire loan exactly the same way. And we sort of started to tell customers that we were a lender. There's a lot. I know I said I had an hour. It will run on longer, Mike, but this is definitely a podcast of its own, or a dinner of its own at some point. I mean, the trials and tribulations of trying to start a business that you know nothing about. It was really difficult. It was really fun. It was really rewarding. And my sort of attitude, when people say, how did you do it? West One, most people listening, I assume, will know, has gone on to be one of the largest non-banking financial institutions in the country. I've obviously played a significant role in getting it there, but one lesson I've learned is that business was just fine without me. If anything, it's kind of grown way beyond my expectations in the very beginning. And I think I was sort of, again, there's a lot there, but people ask me how I got there, and the answer is one good loan at a time. It wasn't about how we're going to get from 100,000 to 100 million. It was, this is working. Let's tweak it. Let's keep going. Let's push ourselves to aspire to be better. And West One was a huge success, and I really, really enjoyed every minute of it. And it sort of helped where I'd had bought some alloy wheels and tried to sell some calculators by mail order and all sorts of weird and wacky things. This felt like something that could actually build me a future. And I saw that business through from inception through to the first private equity backed sale in 2014, at which point I was still, in my 20s, having originated hundreds of millions of loans and managing 100 million of private capital. And I stayed as managing director of that business for 2 years after that sale. And that was a very sharp reminder that I'm not a good employee. It was being honest with myself and saying, like, am I good at this? Yes, I think I am. Are we doing a good job? Yes. Am I enjoying it? And am I the best version of myself? Absolutely not. And it was a very, very difficult decision to leave the business. I rang the CEO of that business, and the first time in my whole life I could remember, well, apart from school, but first time in my working life, I could remember pulling my duvet over my head and thinking, I don't want to go to work today. I rang my CEO and said, we need to meet tonight. And he said, you're leaving, aren't you? And I said, yes. And he said, fine, we'll figure it out. And we figured it out. We shook hands and we did a deal. And I left a lot of capital on the table, but it was the best decision of my life. I mean, my life was transformed immediately after. And, sort of staying true to being authentic, as I talked about, I just valued my own freedom. I wanted to go and back myself and do it again. And I didn't want to pretend that I was happy and I was enjoying going to work every day. So much had changed that I wasn't on board with, and I was being asked to do things that I felt were kind of not exploring my full potential, and I voted with my feet. And it was not many people thought it was a good idea, to be honest with you. So, that's helped shape a lot of, amazing experience. I left with my head held high, had a fantastic reputation. And I think that definitely helped me. I had one thing I agreed to was that I would not compete with the business for 2 years, which is a very, very long time. So no broking, no lending for 2 years. And at the time, I sort of made peace with the fact that I may never do this again. So I'm free to do whatever I want in anything you could possibly think of, just not loans or just not loan related. And that was amazing. To be honest, it was eye-opening. It meant that I could finally lift my head up and sort of look around and think, what do I enjoy? What do I like? And what do I want to do? So, yeah, that's a kind of significant part of my story. In between then and Tab, I for the first time invested in someone else's business. So up until then, I'd only ever started things by myself. And I bought a majority stake in a business called Premier Block Management. And I still own a significant stake of that business today. And it was the first time, that I'd bought somebody else's business, and I was now walking into the boardroom, throwing my weight around. And what I realized is that a lot of the skills that you obtain are transferable to other businesses and to other purposes. So, the structure that I had learned from being a private equity owned business taught me a lot about how to help another business get into that sort of shape if they're looking for an exit, or to grow a sales team, or to budget well, or to build a marketing team, and where to invest and where not to. So I massively enjoyed that experience, actually. I mean, I've just stood down from the board after 7 years, just because I simply want to dedicate more of my time and resource to Tab. But I've left that business in an unbelievable position, unrecognizable from the business it was. And Gary, the managing director of that business, has built a fantastic business that I'm very proud of. And all the while, the kind of days and months are ticking away. I'm answering my phone to people every day saying, no, I can't help you, I can't help you, I can't help you, because that's how my phone had always rung for loans and property and mortgages. And then a day came where I answered my phone and I looked at my calendar and I thought, actually, I probably can help you. I'm free. I did not spend 2 years planning my next big lending business, and far from it. I didn't think about it once. As far as I was concerned, I was out of the game. But I had this idea about something I wanted to do, and it was whereas West One had been about allowing investors to invest in loans and to get a share of the income, which was the only way I could fund loans going all the way back to the beginning. Didn't have any money to lend. Met some people who said, I'll put the money up. If I get 75% of the interest, you can keep 25%. And it meant that we could earn 25% of these bridging loans along the way, and that our investors would earn an income. And I wanted to kind of use that knowledge that I'd gained to kind of what I describe as open up property investments to more people. So if we could do property investment more like the way that I had done loans, then I think it would be appealing to many more people. and because obviously technology had moved into a different stratosphere since I started West One to starting Tab, I felt there was an opportunity to use tech and leverage off these sort of crowdfunding sites and those sorts of things that I'd sort of seen pick up some momentum but not really be effective. And that the idea of Tab was born, where we would do fractional ownership. We would buy real estate on behalf of our investors. Instead of lending against it, they would own a share of it. And if you own 10% of that property, you will get 10% of the income, and we would take a small management fee. And that is something that I'm even more passionate about now than I was when those early sort of ideas started to form some time ago. So there's quite a lot there for you to unpack. I'll probably pause for breath.
Yeah, that's probably a great opportunity. I mean, look, the we founded Avamore in 2015, so you'd already sold, you already sold out. You were still in West One at the time. West One had, I think West One and Avamore have ended up becoming kind of very much peers in at least in the areas that Avamore operate within. But West One was already a kind of behemoth at the time, or at least in our minds, was a significant operator. And for you to have done that from such an early age was nothing short of remarkable, frankly. Obviously, you mentioned Mark Goldberg, obviously a very big influence in your career, and I guess you'll be eternally grateful to him for the help that he gave you. Certainly, you know, there are dozens, I suppose, of lenders, not just in the Northwest but across the country, who've had the same sort of experience. I did actually get a phone call from Mark in the early days of Avamore, but for some reason I think the conversation, he had to ring off the conversation, and then we never picked it back up again, and I suppose the rest is history. But certainly, you know, I know that Together have been supportive of many burgeoning lenders like you were at the time. So full credit to them for being so supportive of the specialist finance industry, the bridging world.
Yeah, and I make it my business to pay it forward.
Yeah.
There's literally nobody that, you know, I'm an open book when it comes to people wanting to come and pick my brains, where there is literally zero upside to me, but me wanting to pay it forward. And I definitely think it's down to Mark's attitude that, you know, when I needed something, that someone was so happy to come and share and give me some of their valuable time. I would definitely hope that in 20 years' time, people are saying similar things about me. It would be, you know, it wouldn't sort of earn me any money or make me successful, but it would be part of my success story, I think, if people were saying that to me. So I think that is an important point.
Yeah, well, I think it's something I share as well. There's a small development lender in the Northwest who I basically set them up, or help them get set up. A family that were doing some private development loans through Avamore going back a few years. You know, we'd moved to almost exclusively institutional models, to the extent that even myself and Zaher, our families couldn't put money through loans anymore. And so I said, well, look, to the chap who's also called Mark, I said, look, there's a family that I know, they're looking, that they want to put some money into lending. They want to put about 5 million into lending. You know, he was working, I think, at a family office lender at the time. He wasn't being treated particularly well. And I just said, look, why don't you go and set something up yourself? And, you know, I think 2 years on, he's delighted. He couldn't be happier, because he's made a great decision. He's the master of his own destiny. And the family, that particular high net worth family, are also happy. And but in other ways, you know, if I put a new broker into an insurance business to help put them together so that they could expand their secured lending offering. You know, it's small things like that, isn't it, that you do for people, putting people together. And I think, you know, obviously it sounds like there's something you do all the time as well.
Yeah.
It's a small market, it's a small world, and you've just got to help. You know, we're here to help each other out, right? That's the priority.
Yeah.
And listen, in terms of Tab, you know, how many of you were there when you started it? I remember when you brought Nick Russell on board in the early days, but you know, was it just you to start with, and then you know, to get up to your 40 odd people now? It was just you.
Yeah, one. In fact, we've got a really strong marketing team, and they've been asking me to look back through the history of all my companies, and more recently the history of Tab. And I went back through my phone Don't have that many pictures from the beginning of West One because we didn't all carry pictures around, cameras around in our pockets. But I do have a lot of pictures on the Tab journey, and I was quite headstrong about documenting the journey of starting a fractional ownership business. You know, I've got pictures of 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5, and then we moved office, and then, you know, 5 to 10, and then moving office again and going from 10 to 20. And, you know, the people that are still here, of which is a lot of them, so we try to keep everybody that we really value. It's kind of just interesting seeing them all come on that journey with me. But it literally starts with you going back to the days of my first company registrations, and West One included. It's like, right, what's the name? What are we going to do? What's our message? And as well as wanting to do fractional ownership and working really hard on how that might work, I self-funded the business. I had some money. I didn't think it was appropriate to raise money to start, although I had people throwing money at me right, left and centre. I wanted to use my own money, and it started with me. You know, I didn't go to a creative agency and start getting logos done and drawn up, which you can be 25, £100,000 in before you start if you want to go down the sort of traditional path of creating a brand and your identity and everything. And literally, I said, I'm going to do lending and property again. I'm back in the game. I don't want to call it bridging for you or loans house or something like that. I want it to be much more broad, and if I can, I want to have a 3-letter word. So I started literally tapping 3-letter words into my keyboard, and I've got, you know, all sorts of weird and wonderful 3-letter words. I thought, could this work? Could this work? Could this work? And then I stumbled across Tab, and the idea of Tab, what it meant to me at the time was, you know, put a loan on your tab, like an old bar bill. And also investor could build up a tab of investments with us, and borrowers could build up a tab of loans. And it kind of, in a split second, I made the decision that it was going to be called Tab. And just before I finished, I put a full stop at the end, and I thought, you know what, looks a bit like a logo. Went through a few fonts, and it was just me on my own in my lounge, sort of playing around with that. And then, you know, I was sort of thinking about how can I add value to bridging loans if I'm going to do this again. And I was talking to someone. I said, look, I just want to be clear and simple. I want to be, you know, lending in black and white. It's just a legal agreement that's written on white paper with black ink. And they were like, well, that sounds like your strapline, lending in black and white. So it became Tab, lending in black and white. And, you know, then it was a case of hitting the phones and talking to people and telling them you're back, and you register a company, you register a web domain, you get your email account sorted. You know, a lot of that stuff you can do on your own, and these sort of barriers to entry, even for a lending business. Look, I was super experienced. I had a good name and a reputation and a phone book to die for if you're starting a bridging loan business. But it still was intense. You know, the amount of work, start putting my first pitch decks together, my first broker presentations, my first investor list of people that I could talk to, and start trying to put meetings in and tell them about what I'm planning to do. And the answer to your long-winded answer to your question is 1. That's how many people were there when I started.
Well, I in lots of ways, you've made my life a lot easier, because you've talked about the journey and how you got set up without me even having to ask or prompt.
Yeah.
So yeah. Either I've done an amazing job as a host, or you've done an amazing job as a guest, and I think I'm going to give you the credit here, Duncan. I think you've done you've made my life very easy, so I appreciate that. I guess early days of Tab, and I think actually you're quite good at marketing. I think you're quite smart at marketing in a way that people in our industry are generally not good at. People in property and specialist finance aren't very good at marketing and promoting themselves. And I think you've always been very good at that. You punched, and I think we do too, but I think you've always punched well above your weight. And so, you know, you had the idea to do a podcast at the FP show, which is, I think, probably one of the first times we met. And I thought that was genius at the time. And you've done a really good job of putting yourselves out there. Do you still have the Land Rover Defender? I think that was one of your marketing one of your marketing tools.
I mean, Yeah, I mean that podcast, but I mean, I obviously sort of tried to stay up to speed with the direction of travel. I thought podcasting was interesting. I wanted to separate it at the time from my day job. I thought, you know, in a similar way to how you're interviewing me now, I felt it would be good for my personal development to talk to people that I liked and I valued their opinion about things that I probably wouldn't talk to them about in my capacity as the CEO of Tab. So identical to what you're doing. I wanted it to be interesting. I love cars. I always felt like I missed out on an opportunity with cars, and I decided to call it Defendercast. And I wanted, in my head, I was going to be live streaming and I could take the podcast to you rather than guests having to come to me. So the idea was I'd drive over in the Defender and we could stream live from the back of the Defender. Now, that is not a simple task. It's a lot. It's a lot easier to do now than it was the sort of 4 or 5 years ago when I was talking about it. But we did do a few episodes where I parked on my drive and had a camera crew come and wire up the whole Defender with mics and cameras. And I did a kind of whole season of meeting interesting people, and I absolutely loved it. I was well out of my comfort zone. I'd never kind of presented or hosted a show of any description, but I sort of felt like I got better at it. You know, I didn't come here to talk to you with any preparation whatsoever. You know, Lynn has been saying to me, you know, don't forget you got the podcast. Like, it's fine. I'll deal with it when it comes up. So I think that it's helped me a lot, having been shoved in front of the camera so many times. But it became Tab U. When we started Tab, we wanted, you know, part of what Katrina wanted to do is have an education channel, wanted to be able to give free value back to the audience. And she said, look, the podcast is not very Tab. Why don't we rebrand it Tab and make it part of Tab University? You've got a following on YouTube. You've got a following on Apple, Spotify with downloads and listens. Let's leverage that. And I was very, very happy to see it go off to a good use. But already, you know, B&C, who I was a new startup lender, Bridging Commercial was seen to be, you know, a very popular outlet in the space. And they wanted to talk to me about Defendercast. And I was like, well, let's talk about Tab. And they're saying, well, we'd rather talk about Defendercast. So that actual podcast at the show, which I convinced them to pay for a booth and let me live podcast throughout the day, was actually Defendercast. And it was sponsored by Tab, sort of bringing it all back round to how your podcast is going now. And it was an amazing opportunity. And I met you on that day, and I met several others of people that I just didn't, you know, I wasn't going to pay for a stand. I didn't really have that much to talk to. We didn't have literature and brochures, and we weren't ready to go and sort of take a stand at the event. But to have Tab up in lights was really, really powerful. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I walked in a hoodie. I sat in my little booth all day, just chatting to people for half an hour with their full time and attention, and I loved it. So that became Tab U, and constantly looking for ways to leverage things that might be a bit different or a bit wacky, a bit disruptive, all the while not to sort of be sort of in your face too much in, you know, in the wrong way.
No, but it's that's awesome. Let's talk about commercial property for a second. So in terms of commercial property, obviously you've got you're now offering fractional ownership. I think was there a hotel investment that you had? You were promoting recently. As someone who's quite an experienced commercial property investor in my own right, you know, I think that at the moment there are some great opportunities out there. I think that, you know, we are kind of, I would say we're almost maybe in a generational buying opportunity. You know, I guess whether that's true or not, we'll know from the test of time.
Well, it would definitely be true depending on when you sell.
Well, this is probably right. Yeah. You know, I myself, I'm currently under offer to buy a really nice office park in southern Surrey for, you know, a 13% initial yield, and offer less than £200 a square foot when resales are 650 quid a foot plus. So from my perspective, I feel like I'm getting a pretty good deal there. But the opportunity you put forward that I saw, which I think was a Travelodge or as a Premier Inn, that would have been a more of a long income type play. What was the take up like on from the investors, and are you now seeing a lot of demand for people who missed out on that opportunity to deploy more capital?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of interesting things there. First and foremost, it's a big shift for those that have supported bridging loans up until this point. There's a kind of lot of hurdles to get over. Yes, we've deployed a lot of capital. We've recovered a lot of it as we did. We have an impeccable track record, but we're convincing people to do sort of 5-year plus investments rather than 1-year investments, typically at a slightly lower return than you would get on a bridging loan. There's a completely different risk profile. Some things are better, some things are worse, and depending on what your appetite for risk is, you want different things. First and foremost, I mean, the take-up's been unbelievable. I mean, the feedback that we've had is that if you can own a high street brand like that for £50,000 without having any debt whatsoever, without having to deal with tenants, without having to speak to a lawyer, do surveys, collecting rent, repairs and maintenance, you can just own your share of it. It means you can spread your money much further across multiple investments and take away the headache. So we've had an overwhelming response. We actually bought 2 Travelodges at the same time. We're completing on both of them tomorrow on the 31st of the month. And we will have something like 50 investors invested in different ranges, with the smallest having invested £1,000, so owning a very tiny share, and the largest almost £500,000 into one of those particular assets. I do believe it's revolutionary. I do believe that there should be a different way to buy property other than debt. That literally the only option right now is that you put down a deposit and you take debt for the duration of the term. So we're buying a property that's got 18 years worth of income. And we're buying at over a 9.25% yield for an asset that has traded at around 6% for the last 15 years. As you say, at a snapshot in time where these assets will be trading somewhere between, the levels that we're buying at and what they have previously, I think in a relatively short period of time. The main thing for me is that I don't want to sell those assets. So I'm trying to build a business that does something slightly different to the private investor model in loans, which is every loan we write this year redeems next year if we do a good job, which means people need to keep searching for new opportunities all the time. This is the other extreme, which is you invest in a property, it lives on the TAB platform forever. In my head, you will walk past a building, it will have a TAB plaque on the outside, you scan it with your phone and it will tell you what the live price is to invest in that building. From a Travelodge hotel to HSBC Tower in Canary Wharf, you will be able to dip in and out of different investments like a stock market for real estate. And
so basically you want to create, rather than, you'll never want to sell the whole asset, you'll just want to create a secondary market for those assets. What would that look like though? Using I think the Travelodge will probably, remain let. It will stay let to Travelodge for as long as they can make money out of it. You use the HSBC Tower in that situation, you probably end up with refurbishment costs and things like that, which will need to be funded, probably a bit more challenging. How do you manage how would you manage, say, capex and things like that in a situation like
stepping stones, right? One good deal at a time, as I talked about earlier in my career. So for these Travelodges, what I've said to people is that after 5 years we will sell these assets. If all the other things that I'm telling you are going to happen don't happen, in 5 years' time we will sell these assets on the open market. And I believe everyone will have made a very good return over 5 years, and they will make another good return on capital upside. I feel sure that people are parking their capital in a very, very safe place. And if I don't get the secondary market off the ground and we don't have liquidity, we're not betting people's money on it. So that's first and foremost. On these 2 properties, I've committed that after 5 years, if you're unable to trade out, if anybody is stuck in it and not able to trade out, we will sell it on the open market. So I've got this big vision for how it will look in the future. But at the moment, I'm mindful of the fact that I'm trying to sell a new product that doesn't really exist. So I've had to make some changes. To answer your next question, there's a kind of few different levels of I want to focus heavily on long-term sustainable income because I think it's something that people struggle to access that they should be able to. So most people aren't buying Tesco investments, not because they don't think it's a good investment, but because it's very competitive and typically big ticket sizes, requires experience and borrowing power. So, if you're saving up for your future and you want to get on the property ladder and ride the wave over a long period of time, I want those assets to become more accessible to people. So that's kind of my vision. But there are also value add transactions that we look at all the time. So we could buy a piece of land and build a house and sell it for a profit. That would mean no income along the way, but a bigger capital gain on exit. I just don't want to become a property developer overnight to make the product work. I want to buy good long-term income. And as you said, there is a huge opportunity now where if we buy sensibly and we don't leverage ourselves up with debt, as well as being a debt provider for my entire career, I think there should be another way. So we could boost returns by leveraging some of these assets, but that is not on my agenda at all, because the downside is that what I've learned throughout my career is expensive debt can kill any deal. And everyone that thought they had cheap debt before is now finding out that if they want to hang on to that property and they don't want to sell it at a discount, that it could cost them double or more to hold it for the next 3 or 5 years. So using the lessons that I've learned, I want to create something that is appealing and has a high probability of being successful. So the only other thing I'll add quickly is that from the rental income, so we have 100 people own 1% of the property. We collect the rent, we pay the agent, so we have a net rent. We then set aside some money every single month into what I've always called the kitty, but it's like a service charge pot, for want of a better word. So there's cash reserves going into build up for the property. So year after year, if we own it for 20 years, there'll be a big cash pot. Some properties will require more of the rental income to go into that pot, and some will require less. And the property, and when you own 1% of that property, you own 1% of the property and its cash reserves. And I think that gives a higher chance that property will be tradable and will be liquid if you're investing in a property that has a tenant, that has proven income, that has cash in the bank. So that's how we combat that on a much smaller scale. And obviously HSBC Tower wouldn't be a great buy now and would struggle to another level to sell that building right now if they had to come to market. It's almost got zero value. As crazy as that sounds, it's the amount it costs to bring that sort of building into the modern world with everything that you need to do to get to Cat A plus and to Grade A offices. I mean, it wouldn't work, let alone converting it to resi or anything else. So that's the value that we bring to customers on the Tab Property side. How do they know whether going on Rightmove, whether this commercial property is good over that commercial property? I've looked at commercial properties that are struggling to trade at 50% of what they traded at before. For a snapshot in time, do I think they were high before? Yes. In hindsight, do I think that they are low now? Almost impossible. I drive past buildings, Mike, at the moment, and I think this is the cheapest I will be able to buy that property for the rest of my life. That's what I feel sure of. £100 a foot, £200 a foot for a good office is not going to come around again. No,
I think there's definitely, like I said, I think there's a great buying opportunity. I suppose, putting myself in your shoes as a business owner, I talk a lot about being focused or maintaining a singular focus within the businesses that I'm involved in. At the moment, I'm involved in 5 different businesses, and my attention spread too thin. Is there a danger of creating additional business lines that your attention and your focus on the parts of the business that maybe still have some way to run in terms of development, that you could end up, shall we say, your attention could be a little bit sent in too many directions? I mean, how are you combating the dangers of the sort of the bright shiny object syndrome dangers, and how do you try to make sure that you keep focused on all the, or making sure everything's you're applying the best focus to each side of the business?
you'll hear the same things from me over and over again. Surround yourself with good people first and foremost. You know, one thing I learned early on in my career is that I'm good at ideas. I'm not the person to execute. Doesn't mean I'm not capable. It just means I'm not the best at it. So the people in my senior management team, we've got ex JP Morgan, ex Bowen Leighton Paisner, ex Credit Suisse. They are tasked with execution. They're not tasked with coming in with big ideas and pitching to the board about buying a bank or some of the other things that I've done over the last couple of years. Their sole focus is on to test me whether this is a good idea, whether the business is in good shape to do it, and then to execute. So completing the funding round that we did at the end of last year, raised £300 million, was not a mean feat. You know, it was intense from due diligence to negotiations, and execution is as hard to execute as a deal as I've ever been involved with. Private securitization run by NatWest Markets. I mean, it was a monster deal. If it relied on me to execute, it wouldn't have got there, to be frank. Needed the whole team to pull in the right direction, work to a deadline, understand the size of the prize, and be rewarded for doing so. And I see, look, I do understand the question, and I've also involved in several other businesses. And one thing I did when I went away at Christmas was I said, right, what does 2024 look like for me? And the decision I made was that I wanted to step down from my extracurricular activities. I mean, I'm involved in more than 5 other businesses, which I've had a strong hand in starting or investing in, and sitting on the board, and in some cases in weekly meetings. And I decided that it's not all or nothing, but could I make some improvements? Would I be more productive? And I said, I'm standing down from everything else that is outside of the tab. Tab is Tab, and it's Halo Capital Partners, and it is the finance company. And those 3 businesses need my full time and attention. And if I'm going to do that, I'm going to have to relinquish some responsibility on other businesses that I really do enjoy, and that are a release for me sometimes outside of Tab. But I felt sure that was the right decision. I came back at the beginning of Jan, and I stepped down from the board of several other businesses. And it's a bit weird not having those other things to do, but I feel sure they're in good hands, and that they've got good plans and a strategy to execute. And I wanted to focus my time on Tab. And talking about this particular product, this is why Tab started. Without wanting to sound sort of grotesque, building another bridging loan business wasn't all that exciting to me. Opening up real estate investments to everybody is actually a vision that genuinely keeps me awake at night. The size of the opportunity dwarfs anything else I've ever heard of, any other business plan I've ever heard of. It's a proper kind of unicorn shot. It's something that would be a lasting legacy. It would change the way that people invest in property, how to invest in it. And bridging loans became a way to me to start evidencing I needed more money to build the tech. I didn't want to sell the business. Started to get some loan opportunities, and I felt like this could really help. Now, when I'm launching fractional ownership investments, it's off the back of £400 million of loans, 1,000 plus investors that have gravitated to the platform. We've made a very, very strong profit every year. We've almost doubled our profits year on year on year. And I've been able to build a tech team and a marketing team and a finance team, all with this vision in mind. So that feels like less of a distraction, if you like. But there have been some things that have come along. I mentioned buying a bank. I had an opportunity to buy a banking license, and I presented to my board. I stayed up all night and I put a presentation together, and I presented to my board, and they said, no. We're not doing it. We don't like it. We don't want to do it. And these are the reasons. And I said, I think you're wrong. But I wouldn't be asking you if I didn't value your opinion, and therefore I'm going to ditch it. And when it came to launching commercial mortgages, I did the same. I said, look, I think we're ready. I think we can get the funding. I think we can use our new funding providers to leverage. This is the idea. This is where I think we sit in the market. And I pitched to the board, and they said, love it, love it, love it, love it, love it. And I said, right, execute. If you really think it's a good idea, don't come back in a few months and say, well, this was the reason why we couldn't make it work. If you don't believe it's a good idea, tell me now. If you don't think you can do this, tell me now. If you need more resource or more help or something that we don't have now, tell me along the way. But what I'm not going to do is it didn't work out because we didn't think of this and we didn't think of that. So that's how I do it.
Yeah. Oh, listen, it almost strikes me that you had this sort of burning desire to offer fractional ownership of real estate opportunities for the man in the street, because that's almost like the central business case for TAB. And it's sort of it's almost, it sounds to me like almost like the lending division is now it's one service offering, but it's not core to the future of TAB, at least as far as your vision is concerned. Is that a fair way of expressing it?
Look, I think I'm super proud of TAB and the products that we offer in the market, and it gives us the opportunity to do things that are far greater than just staying still and having a successful and profitable business. The private equity firms and the debt funds and the credit funds and the banks that have backed us, I fully expect to back us all the way, which is, currently we have a £208 million loan book. Our business plan on the lending side says we'll have a £1 billion loan book by 2026. I believe that we can do that, and we've always hit every target that we set ourselves. But what I'm definitely not saying is that's it, that's what we do, don't talk to us about other things. And one thing, having had investors who have had good returns for so long, now that we have these institutional credit lines, and it makes more sense for us to continue developing those relationships, we've now have a void of people that aren't getting as much product as they would like to. And it's kind of an obvious meeting of minds that this business now should start to, now that you can buy property at 10% plus and you can pay investors returns commensurate to the types of returns they're used to in bridging loans, it feels like now's the time.
Yeah, well, I think particularly as well that you look at a lot of institutional investors, they're facing long-term structural and strategic requirements to sell commercial assets. So there is an opportunity to pick up, as I'm experiencing. There is there hasn't been a better time for quite a long time to pick up kind of good quality assets at pricing that's genuinely sensible and executable. I think the one caveat is that the financing costs of those, the financing costs at the moment for commercial term debt is high, relatively speaking. Although relative to the purchase prices, it's not. But that potentially serves as a bit of a barrier, or maybe can drive a bit of reluctance. But in your case, it doesn't seem to be an issue because you're looking to do it all equity anyway.
Yeah, and my thing is, let's club together and buy the property without the bank, and then we get all of the income. Rather than the bank having first lien over the asset and all of the income until such time as they're paid back. And you can't accurately predict how much that cost of debt is going to be over the short, medium, or long term. You can accurately predict whether that building will continue to produce an income of some description. It might be a bit less or a bit more than you expected, but you're not going to end up with nothing if you buy the right assets and you're prepared to let them. So to me, if we buy a multi-let building, and we're looking at something on the Holloway Road, you buy a multi-let building, and one of the tenants leaves and you don't have any debt. Worst case scenario is you thought you were going to get 8%, you actually get 4% for a few years. You find a new tenant, it goes back up to 8%. We're not under pressure to sell it. We don't have a mortgage lender breathing down our neck. The price isn't fluctuating. We don't have to service the debt whilst it's there. We have cash reserves. We can tart the property up, or we can do a marketing scheme, or we can fix the roof if something comes up, without having to go back to our investors. And if we own those buildings in 25 years' time, we will look like heroes. I feel sure of it. And I'm prepared to push the message out really, really, really hard, which is, give it a go, invest in real estate, earn 7.5%, paid on a monthly basis, net of all fees and service charges and everything. And let us do the hard work for you. Give it a go. Do 5 grand, 10 grand, 50 grand at a time. And it's the size of the opportunity, Mike, that interests me. It's, I can see myself walking around New York and, adding an American property to my portfolio, and, adding commercial, residential and HMOs and some short incomes and long income. I think, to spread my money across to about £1 million, and I can spread it across 20 properties, I think I've got a better chance of not losing my money. or accurately predicting my income than if I had one property with debt. And then if I need some of my money back, I can look in the market and see who's bidding. I might be able to release 25 grand without having to. Buying and selling property is unbelievably clunky. It's almost embarrassing that you have to go through those steps. That you've got one lawyer arguing with another lawyer about a covenant from the 40s, and surveyor pointing out things that another surveyor wouldn't, and the land registry waiting for notices to be updated, and freeholders argue. It's a nonsense. It's an absolute nonsense.
Well, I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more, especially the 6% or near 6% stamp duty that I'm going to have to pay on the asset that I'm buying. And the fact that I'm waiting for, I'm 2 months after applying for the searches, still waiting for my local search to come back. I think we could we could probably bore quite a lot of people and talk about the technical side of it, Duncan, I'm sure. But the reality is that you're absolutely right. In this day and age, in the 21st century, that it is so difficult and so painful to transact on a property is embarrassing. And I like to think that we're quite innovative in this country in lots of ways, but it's a real indictment on the real estate sector that the buying and selling of real estate remains as painful as it is.
Not if I've got anything to do about it.
Well, yeah. Well, listen, there's we can continue that particular stream of conversation offline. Want to start to wind down, but I'd like to know really what's your thoughts about the future of TAB? What are the next 5 years, next 10 years of TAB look like?
I think we've touched on a lot of it. I think, navigating our way out of the turbulent market is fundamental to what we do next. I'm obsessed about protecting investor capital. I don't want, I think it's dealing with the difficult things first. Look, I've talked a lot about my big ideas and where I want to go and how I see the future, but I come to work every day. On a lot of occasions, I'm the first person in. I'm not always the last person to go because I like to spend a lot of time with my children in the afternoons if I can, on a Monday and a Wednesday and a Friday, because balance of life is really, really important to me. But first and foremost, making sure that I don't have that awkward moment when I have to stand up and say I wasn't watching and something happened that I didn't agree with. So constantly searching to just get better at what we do. I know I've talked a lot about new products, as I said, but we have not cracked bridging loans. We're not the best bridging loan lender in the market. We don't write the most business. We don't have the most efficient form of capital. So, it's constantly just trying to improve that, I guess, is the most important thing. And I think if you get the basics right, then everything else will follow. I don't have any desire to exit the business. I've been there before. I've learned that most people who have got income want capital. Most people that have got capital want income. And what I'm searching for is both, so that I can continue to enjoy my life and build the business. It might not be fractional ownership. It will pivot. Something will come along. A new technology will come along. Something I'm super interested in at the moment is AI, and actually using it to my advantage. I use ChatGPT on a daily basis. I'm a paid customer. I use ChatGPT 4. I sat in a meeting before with some of my colleagues, and they were saying, well, how would we find out this and how would we find out that? And I went on to ChatGPT and I answered all of their questions in 60 seconds with links of where it came from and resources and more information, drilling down into detail. And I think if you don't embrace this type of technology, you will get left behind. And also, one thing that we do differently from almost every other lender I know in the market is that we have built our own proprietary tech, which is unbelievably good. It gives us access to real-time data, and it's not a kind of shiny front end on what everybody else does. It is completely different end to end, from sourcing to completion to loan management to collections. It does our HR functions, it does our task management, and I can report on an infinite number of tasks and things that are going on within the business. And we are busy trying to integrate AI into different parts of it for the benefit of our staff, to make their life easier, better, access to information, the speed of it, and the accuracy of it, and for our customers to communicate with us in different ways. and also to unlock things that we don't know about, like reading our data and providing us with insights that now we have a substantial amount of data, it's time to put it to use. And I think one thing you'll see from Tab over the next kind of 6 weeks, 6 months is that we are leading the way on integrating AI into our technology. So to give you one quick example, Mike, we have a button now in our platform that will read a valuation, and it will summarize that valuation and test it against our lending criteria and highlight anything that it thinks we should be aware of. So, it's reading valuations, testing what date they were, how far away the valuer is from the property, if the comps are in date, if they match, if the any sort of outliers, any comments that are made in the valuation should be made aware of. So I can, get an inquiry with a valuation attached to it. I think we are ahead of any other lender in 60 seconds. And it's that sort of thing that I want to be able to gain those 1%. And I think my point is that I'm hoping you'll see from Tab these sorts of innovations that are part of our core strategy, is just not to sit back and watch and see what others do. It's, do we think this is a value? Do we feel it's worth investing time and energy in it? So another example is our lending criteria has been loaded into a large language model. All of our lending criteria across all products, and anybody in the business can ask it a question about, do we do this, do we do that? And it will give you an instant and accurate answer, way beyond any one person's knowledge. That system is up to speed, and we'll continue to develop things like that into the platform. And I think that's one area you should watch out for with Tab, about kind of how we do things.
Yeah, I guess because it's interesting hearing you talk about it, and I think again we can bore a lot of our listeners with the ins and outs of it. But in the last year, I've learned how to code, as Zaher's learned how to code, and we're sort of looking at how we can implement that into the business. And so we're probably not as advanced as you are in terms of the building out the packages that we want, but we've built a number of prototypes. But one of the things, it was interesting hearing you talk about the valuation, the valuation side of things, because I guess I was actually going to do something very similar, but with monitoring surveyor reports, whereby you can take the text from the monitoring surveyor's reports and summarize those. But actually, what I'm going to try and do is I'm actually going to try and take all the monitoring surveyor's reports we've had historically, and effectively using the photos from the monitoring surveyor's reports, teach a large language model, so that when you show pictures of the site, it can determine with a certain degree of accuracy, and that will get better over time, how far advanced the site is. And you compare that, the photos of the site, with the amount of drawdowns to date or the cost to complete, and so that we can accurately, with say half a dozen photos from a site, we can establish what the remaining cost to complete is going to be. And actually, ironically, I don't, although it'll take some time to develop, I don't think that the technology already exists for that, to do that. And I think it's going to be a real game changer for us and I suppose others in our space. So yeah, I think we're going to have to book a long lunch or a long dinner to talk about these things, because I think we've got there's a lot to pick your brain on. It was interesting hearing you talk about not wanting to be sold. It's a question I often ask people from both the lending and broker community. I wasn't surprised that you said that you wouldn't want to sell the business, because I think that your experience after exiting or exiting financially West One wasn't necessarily that great, and I guess you very much like to be the master of your own destiny. Looking at it on the other side, would you be open? I mean, it sounds like you were looking at the opportunities to acquire a banking license. Would you be open to acquiring other businesses, either direct competitors, or looking at businesses that could vertically integrate within your own?
Yeah, I mean, it's very, very high up on my agenda. I mean, I've got a very, very high bar set, and there's, there are only two ways to get there, or through organic growth or acquisition. I'm experienced at acquiring businesses and disposing of them. I feel like I know what to watch out for. And the short answer is absolutely yes. And we are in conversations with some brokerages that we'd be super keen to partner with through acquisition or merger of some description. I want to be able to offer our customers a much broader product offering, and we're not the best lender for everyone who wants to borrow money, but we are good at building relationships and being trustworthy and transparent about what we do. And I think we could add a huge amount of value to a business that's gone as far as they can go and requires some investment, or requires, things change as well. The longer a company goes on, business partners want to go in different directions, customer value changes, the amount of capital required to do things changes. And I'd say more than that, we are very acquisitive, and I'd like to be seen as somebody, as I have been, that would help first and foremost. That I would never give away information to the wrong person. I would never sort of stray beyond the realms of what I think is fair and reasonable. And I would be shocked if we talked again in 18 months and we hadn't made some sort of acquisition.
Yeah, well, that sounds very interesting. And to be honest with you, particularly within the lending space, every time we talked about the FP show, we can talk about the NHFBX. So every time you go to one of these lending roadshows, there's 100+ lenders that all do the same thing, all fighting over a relatively small piece of the pie. It's been a long-standing view of mine, and I think it will eventually come true that the specialist lending space is ripe for consolidation, and that we will see a lot more of the lending being done by a lot fewer lenders in 5 years from now. And a lot of that will just come about through critical mass, and that critical mass will come through acquisitions or people being marginalized or sidelined.
Yeah, and capital flowing back through the city, and better businesses being more investable. I think our technology alone is of value, but what we'd rather do is leverage that side of the business and offer particular bits of the platform to others to help us improve it dramatically, rather than sort of sell out and think about what to do next. I don't think my work at Tab will ever be done. Whilst it's profitable and it's growing and it's exciting, what else would I do? And where there are businesses that come along that could, one and one could make more than two, for instance, plugging our technology into them, and improving efficiencies or reducing the cost of capital across their loan book, or a number of other things, I'd be super keen to do that. And I think as capital starts to flow, as specialist lending gets closer to high street lending will pretty much disappear, in my view. I mean, the high street is only really 4 banks, and they're harder and harder to deal with than they've ever been if you're sort of man on the street, as far as leverage and ease of actually getting a loan out of them. And everyone else really, sort of non-bank lenders, like sort of the challenger banks and non-bank lenders, are all sort of getting much closer and closer together. So I share your view on that, actually.
Yeah, well, I guess time will tell, and certainly we can talk about that. And again, another thing we can chat about when we do that dinner. I guess last couple of questions, and yeah, we have managed to get almost the full 2 hours, Duncan. So clearly we were able to keep both of our attention going. So I just wanted to ask you about people who've been influential. You mentioned Mark Goldberg and you mentioned your dad. I mean, would you say they've been the most important figures in your career, or are there any other people you'd like to kind of credit and acknowledge as being important factors and figures in your life and career?
No, I mean, my answer is slightly different to most that I hear, which is that I try to take as little bits from as many people as possible, rather than sort of emulate or be influenced by any one particular person. So I mentioned it to you before when we talked about reading books, and I've started to listen to, rather than read, way more books than I have done throughout my life. I typically find there's sort of 1 or 2 things that really resonate with me, and that will adjust my way of thinking or approaching something. I've never sort of come across anyone so groundbreaking that I need to listen to and watch everything they've ever said and try to kind of copy them. But I will take something from almost every conversation, not always positive. Sometimes it's, I would never do that. I would never do it that way. Other times it would be, I should incorporate that into my patter or my thinking. So the short answer is probably no. There's no one I think, there have been some people that have been constants throughout my life, and I don't think they would be constants, if we didn't get on as well as we do. I mean, I've worked with Stephen Wasserman, my business partner, for a very, very long time, longer than I know most business partners have worked together, and I feel sure we will continue to do so for the rest of our careers, whenever it's appropriate to do so. And he's definitely my confidant in sort of all these weird and wacky ideas. And I think one of the main reasons is because we're so different. We challenge each other. We come at things from completely other ends of the scale. As I said, he went to university, got a degree, went traveling. I went straight to work, and we sort of carried on this theme for a very, very long time. But if we both agree on something, it's because we've come at it from opposite ends and we've met in the middle, and therefore it's a kind of a better chance of success. And also, it's really important that if Stephen put his foot down and said, "Look, I think it's a stupid idea and you shouldn't do it," I would put more store in, about more value in what he was saying, because I know that he's got good intentions and it comes from the right place and he knows me. And so, I've got some very, very, very close friends, Stephen being one, and my friend Chris and my friend Lee, who I can talk to about anything. And I think people lack that sort of sounding board. From what I've seen, they, too much of the disruptive and not enough of the who should I take advice from. So that's a kind of roundabout answer.
Listen, it's I think it's a great answer, and appreciate the acknowledgements that you've given, and not only have people had a big impact on your life, but I think you've probably had a even more profound impact on a lot more people's lives. So full credit to you anyway for recognizing those people. Last question, which is usually the question we close the show, and this will be quite interesting because I guess despite being still relatively young, you've experienced a lot and you've done a lot and you've had a lot of success over this period. But if you were to say anything to your, I don't know, your 16, 17-year-old self, if you were to give yourself some advice, some self-talk, what would you say to yourself and why?
Nothing. There's not a single thing that I would change. I think this kind of sounds like a radical answer, and I have been asked this question before. Even the most catastrophic mistakes and things that really I just wouldn't want to talk about or publicize again, I would not change for the world. And if anything, I'd sort of thinking about who would be listening and how they would take this, even from like my mum to ex-business partners and stuff. I mean, I'd say even lean into it more, the disruptive nature, to challenge anybody at any time, to be yourself, to be all of the things we've talked about, Mike, to be honest with you. If anything, I still see myself holding back a little bit, wanting to keep the ship steady. And I think that's possibly more because I've got more responsibility now. I'm personally responsible for over 200 million pounds, which is not a small amount of money. And I do feel personally responsible. But, when I talk about other business ventures and ideas that I've got, perhaps I'm more reserved now than I have been at times in my career. I would say, JFDI, just fucking do it. Don't look back, don't be scared, don't get put off. What's the worst that can happen? And I've continued to hone that throughout my career. But I think that there's room for more of it, to be honest with you.
Well, that's JFDI, just fucking do it. I love that. I love that mantra. And I think we could all do with a bit more of that sometimes. Less planning, less talking, more doing. Duncan Kreeger, thank you so much. You've been a great guest, very inspirational, certainly got me wanting to spend more time with you and talking to you. And so if I've got that feeling, hopefully most of our audience is going to feel the same way. Inevitably, there will be some of our audience who will be sufficiently inspired that will want to reach out to you and get in touch and talk to you further. How can someone get in touch with you? Are there any particular social media channels that you'd like people to contact you on, or are there any particular preferred routes of contact?
It's so funny. You just reminded me, Mike. I went on a podcast a couple of years ago now from like a young guy who I know really, really well, super successful, and he asked me this question at the end, and I gave my email address, and he said, "Are you a dinosaur? Who uses email now? Just how are people going to DM you? What's your handle on this and that?" And I just had a flashback of that when you said it. I think it won't be difficult to find me. I'm quite public on social media in that I really do enjoy, firstly, it's free. And I think people don't make enough of being able to use these free tools around them. Instagram typically is where I hang out, more for sort of posting on my stories. It's kind of short, it doesn't live as long, and it's super interesting. And I find, it's good for like my hobbies and things that I'm interested in. But that's where I kind of document my life. So if anybody's interested in that, it's just at Duncan Kreeger, my full name. Otherwise, possibly email, because I have help monitoring my email and I make sure I get back to everybody. I mean, unfortunately, LinkedIn, as good as it is, things get lost in the ether of, do I want to build a new website and do I want to employ a new member of staff? Kind of get spammed there. So I find it hard to have a meaningful conversation. I normally jump straight offline. But I don't think it'll be difficult to reach out, and I've got plenty of time. I'm super busy, but I've got plenty of time to talk to people and expand my knowledge base. So I'm happy for people to reach out by email, which is dk@tabhq.com, or Duncan at Duncan Kreeger at Instagram.
Right, well, there you have it, folks. That's how you can get hold of Duncan. If for any reason you haven't blocked me yet across social medias, I'm at property_funder. So that's a good opportunity for you to block me or mute me. But if you are crazy enough and you want to follow me, you can also follow those links and you can follow me that way. Duncan, it's been an absolute honor and a pleasure.
Thank you very much for your time, Mike. I appreciate you giving me the platform, and I feel sure that we'll continue to converse.
We 100% will, and yeah, I'm going to now have to buy you lunch and dinner, and we'll continue the conversation in a more private setting. So without further ado, Duncan, thanks very much. It's been amazing, and we'll speak soon.
Take care.
Cheers.
Cheers. Bye bye.